Today we're out here taking a look at the 2016 Lexus IS 200T. As the name implies, this is the latest Lexus to receive their brand new 2-liter turbocharged engine. Now, in a nutshell, the big difference for 2016 is that we get two new engines under the hood, and that old 2.5-liter 6-cylinder engine is now gone. As a result of the relatively limited changes for the IS for the 2016 model year, I'm going to refer you over to the 2015 IS video if you want to know about this vehicle's exterior and interior in greater detail. As you can tell from this enormous grille up front, this particular trim is the IS 200T F Sport. The F Sport is the looks faster, handles slightly better package. In 2016, the IS 200T that we're taking a look at here and the IS 300 are both available in either F Sport trim, which you're taking a look at here again, or non-F Sport trim. Although the IS has grown over time and this is the longest IS they have ever built, it is still relatively small in this segment, with just the S60 and entries like the Mercedes-Benz CLA being a little bit shorter. Now, the long wheelbase Volvo S60 is actually a hair longer than this generation of IS. Of course, versus the Volvo and the extremely large Audi A4, this has a classic rear-wheel drive proportion, so we have this nice long hood up front, relatively compact body in the back. This overall profile is one of the more attractive in this segment. Even though we have a small 4-cylinder turbo engine under the hood, we still have dual exhaust tips in the back, and of course we have a new badge back here that says IS 200T. Under the hood is where we find the biggest change for 2016. We no longer have that extremely smooth 2.5-liter V6 engine. That old engine produced 204 horsepower. Instead, we get this 2-liter turbocharged engine that we first saw in the Lexus NX. This engine produces 241 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque. Interestingly enough, we also find a new V6 engine under this hood in a new mid-level trim, the IS 300 all-wheel drive. This 2-liter turbocharged engine is available only in rear-wheel drive. The next step up is that 300 all-wheel drive. It produces 255 horsepower and 236 pound-feet of torque from a slightly tweaked version of their top-end 3.5-liter V6. That IS 350 still uses that top-end V6 relatively unchanged for this year. It produces 306 horsepower and 277 pound-feet of torque. Lexus's transmission lineup is a little bit unusual because even though Lexus was the first to the 8-speed party ages ago, they really have not been aggressive in putting that 8-speed automatic in every model they sell. So we only find the 8-speed auto in the rear-wheel drive models, and that would be the IS 200T or the IS 350 rear-wheel drive, either in regular or F-Sport trim. If you want any of the all-wheel drive models, then it steps down to a 6-speed automatic. So the IS 300 is 6-speed automatic only, since it's available only in all-wheel drive. Fuel economy for the IS 200T is the highest in the IS lineup at 22 miles per gallon city, 33 highway, and 26 combined. The new 300 all-wheel drive drops that down to 19, 26, 21. Now you will notice that that fuel economy number in this turbo is a little bit lower than you'll find in the BMW 320i, Audi A4 base model, which is a front-wheel drive vehicle, or most versions of Volvo's S60, which again are front-wheel drive based. Obviously, with the new turbocharged engine under the hood, the base model's performance figures do change a little bit. The old IS 250 went from 0 to 60 in just over 7 seconds. This will now do it in 6.8. The IS 300 all-wheel drive will do it in 6.1, and the 350 will do it in 5.6. Now, Lexus tends to be very conservative in both engine and transmission tuning, and as a result, you will find faster 0 to 60 times in a wide variety of the competition. The BMW 328, for instance, will do 0 to 60 in 5.7 seconds, making it the approximate equal to the IS 300 all-wheel drive. That means that this particular model more directly competes with the ATS 2.5 or the BMW 320i. On the inside, Lexus did not make any significant changes to the seats or to the dashboard or infotainment systems. So I'm going to refer you on over to my last review on the IS F Sport if you want to know more about the inside of the car. In a nutshell, these seats are quite comfortable, but they're not quite as adjustable as some of the competition. We only have a 2-way adjustable lumbar support, not a 4-way variety that we do find in some of the competition, and BMW's and Volvo's seats are a little bit more comfortable. Likewise, the rear seats are exactly the same as the last IS we took a look at. That means these are a little bit more compact than some of the other luxury options out there. I still, however, have enough room for my head and enough legroom to sit comfortably behind myself. For 2016, Lexus didn't make any major changes to the interior, so we still have height adjustable seatbelts there. We still start out with Softex imitation leather seating. Our particular model has the optional sport seats with heating and ventilation. The door panel design is basically as you'd expect, as is the dashboard design. You can see that we have the same basic look that we've seen for a few years right over here, with this somewhat small infotainment screen in the center. These semi-touch screen controls for the dual zone climate control. So this is a touch slider right over here. for the temperature. We also have physical buttons for some of the other controls, single slot optical disc player. We have the controls for the heated and ventilated seats down there, a very traditional console shifter, and of course this somewhat awkward infotainment controller. The IS200T still gets the Lexus Drive Select button, so we can choose between Eco, Normal, and Sport over there, 2 fixed cup holders, and a moderately sized center console. There aren't too many cars in this segment that offer an LCD instrument cluster. This is one of them and has that physical ring that slides side to side when you press a button out here on the steering wheel. Although this display is not as configurable as Cadillac Q, it's just about as configurable as the Volvo system, and the ATS doesn't get the latest Q LCD instrument cluster. Since we are in the F Sport trim, we do get this 3-spoke F Sport steering wheel with control buttons on the front and paddle shifters on the back. When it comes to acceleration, this new turbocharged engine is definitely an improvement over the last V6. However, it's not as great of an improvement as you might think. Even though, again, as this produces about the same horsepower on paper as the BMW and Mercedes engines, they are notably quicker. We ran from 0 to 60 in 6.9 seconds in this 200T F Sport rear-wheel drive. On the flip side, this generation of the Lexus IS continues to brake extremely short for a luxury sedan like this. We ran from 60 to 0 in 120 feet, so I'm going to go ahead and give this an A when it comes to braking. Likewise, handling is also excellent, and I'm going to give this an A as well. If your only experience with the Lexus brand has been with the Lexus RX, then you need to test out a Lexus IS, because the IS, the GS, and the LS are actually some of the best handling vehicles in their segment. This vehicle has a near perfect 50-50 weight balance like you see advertised on BMW models, but this vehicle actually feels lighter and more nimble and actually more direct and communicative than the BMW 3 Series. It's most noticeable out on a track. When you're out on a track, you'll notice that the BMW 3 Series tends to plow in the corners just a little bit more. That's not going on in the Lexus IS. In addition, the steering is a little bit more direct in this model. Now that said, the IS is actually going to be slightly slower around a track than the BMW 3 Series, and the reason for that is just the acceleration in this model. It is still slower than BMW 328i, and of course the IS 350 is slower than the latest BMW 3-liter turbo as well. The distance you gain in the corners is given up in the straightaways to the BMW 3 Series. Being faster around a track isn't everything, because the IS really excels at the nuance and the feel. Lexus has tuned their F Sport models very similarly to BMW's M Sport models. And that means that this is definitely firmer than the standard version of the IS, but it's not as firm as that next category up, which would be a dedicated performance model like a BMW M. A quiet cabin has long been a Lexus hallmark, and that continues even in this IS F Sport model. We scored 69 decibels at 50 miles an hour. That is one of the quieter entries in this particular segment. On the whole, cars in this segment have been getting quieter and quieter, and we did score a very similar rating in the Audi A4 and the Infiniti Q50. When it comes to fuel economy, I have to admit that I am a hair disappointed in the IS200T. This scores 26 miles per gallon average in the EPA test. We've been averaging 24.9 over a week of very mixed driving. That means that the BMW 320i, A4 in front-wheel drive trim, and the latest versions of Volvo S60 and the Infiniti Q50 Hybrid are all more efficient than the IS200T. In fact, the old IS250 was actually a hair more efficient than this particular model. We averaged 27.5 miles per gallon in the 250 in 2014, this one again 24.9. It is a little bit of a reduction. It may sound strange, but even though this engine is a little bit more rough around the edges, the 4-cylinder engine noise is not quite as pleasing as that old 6-cylinder engine. We don't get quite as good a fuel economy, and the acceleration is only a hair better. I actually like this engine more than the 250. The reason is that this engine is just more drivable than that 2.5-liter V6. The biggest difference, of course, is the low-end torque. Not only does this engine produce a great deal more torque than that 2.5-liter engine did, it produces it at much lower RPMs. That means that this transmission does not have to shift quite as often as the old 6-speed did, even though we have 2 more gears. In the IS200T, it is possible to hill climb in 7th gear or 8th gear with the engine loafing around 1500 to 1700 RPM, and you just couldn't do that in the IS250. It also means that when you're cross-shopping this with the turbocharged competition like the BMW, the Mercedes, the Audi, or the Volvo, this is going to feel much more like the rest of the competition. It's not going to feel as different as the last model did. Of course, on the downside, when you're revving this engine up, it definitely does sound like a 4-cylinder engine. As we've come to expect from Lexus, there is a premium to be paid for the Lexus reliability reputation. This starts at $37,325 for the IS200T. And that's even though this performs only a little bit better than the BMW 320i, priced at $33,150. Now, we do have more standard feature content inside this vehicle than we do in the 320i at that price. However, this is still going to be a little bit more expensive than a comparable BMW. In addition, the Cadillac ATS 2.5 with their naturally aspirated 2.5-liter engine is just about as fast as this 0 to 60, but it's going to cost you less at $33,215. A Volvo S60 T5 would also be less expensive than this at $33,950, but it is going to be front-wheel drive, and the IS200T is going to be rear-wheel drive. In terms of performance, the IS300 all-wheel drive is more or less the direct competitor to the BMW 328i or the Cadillac ATS 2.0T. That will set you back $39,700. That's still a little bit more expensive than the 328i or the Cadillac ATS. If you want over 300 horsepower in your Lexus IS, you're going to have to pay for the IS350, which starts at $40,870, and you will have to add extra for the F-Sport trim we're looking at here, or all-wheel drive. In my book, the two most direct competitors to this vehicle are the BMW 320i, the BMW 328i, and the Cadillac ATS in 2.5 and 2.0T trims. Because all three of those vehicles have a solid rear-wheel drive dynamic, and they're all trying to be the sportier entries in this segment. In the latest generation, the BMW 3 Series has become larger, softer, and much more comfortable than it was in the past. That means that the handling award actually goes to the Lexus IS, tying with the Cadillac ATS. The Cadillac ATS is a little bit more engaging than this particular vehicle. However, the base power plant in this, I think, is a little bit more pleasing than that naturally aspirated 4-cylinder in the Caddy. Now, you should know that the Cadillac ATS with the 2-liter turbocharged engine is going to be just as nimble as this IS200T. However, it's going to be considerably faster. It makes an awful lot more power than this particular engine. You can also get it with all-wheel drive, and Cadillac will do an 8-speed automatic with the all-wheel drive in that ATS. BMW and Mercedes especially seem to like to underrate their engines, so the 328i and the C300 likely produce more power than the manufacturers claim. Lexus, however, is much more conservative, so based on the numbers, this engine is actually producing about 241 horsepower. That, combined with the relatively more gentle transmission programming, is the reason that the IS200T is slower to 60 than we see in the competition, even though the advertised horsepower figures are approximately the same. Again, if you want the same kind of performance that you're going to find in a 328i or a C300 or a Volvo S60 T5 or T6, you're going to need to get the next model up, which would be the IS300. In terms of performance, the IS350, which would be the top-end Lexus IS, lives in an area sort of between the BMW with the 2-liter turbo and their 3-liter turbo engine. Perhaps the most direct competitor to the IS350 would be the Infiniti Q50. Infiniti at this point does not have any smaller and less powerful engines like we see in the Lexus IS. That's why I'm not really comparing it too much to the IS200T. It is that next category up. Lexus has proven themselves over the years to be a very conservative luxury car manufacturer. Even though the looks on the outside of the IS are much more expressive than we've expected out of Lexus in the past, what's under the hood and what's in the cabin are still clinging to that very conservative design philosophy. Toyota does not like to change things radically from one generation to the other, or even from one model year to the other, like we're seeing right here in the IS200T. That's why we're not seeing all-wheel drive with this 8-speed automatic in the Lexus IS at this moment, although we might see it in the future. The simple truth about any turbocharged or supercharged engine is that you're adding complexity to the engine. You have more parts in there, more points of potential failure. And that's why Lexus has traditionally clung to naturally aspirated engines. This is really one of the first turbocharged Lexuses that we're seeing. Even still, Lexus's conservative design philosophy is still showing in the IS200T because, again, the power output rating on this particular engine seems to be a little bit more conservative than a lot of the competition. On the downside, when it comes to performance, the IS does give up an awful lot in terms of acceleration to the competition. Handling is excellent in this vehicle, as is braking, as is the ride, but acceleration seems to be what a lot of people care most about, and that's definitely lower in this than a lot of the Germans or other Europeans. This particular segment is also about to get much more crowded because we are going to see the Alfa Romeo and Jaguar sedans that are about this size very, very soon. In addition, Hyundai plans to have their Genesis brand compete in this segment over time as well. Fortunately, in the luxury car segment, there seems to be a little bit more differentiation going on. Mercedes has actually placed their C300 decently above the Lexus IS, and in many ways, I don't really consider them competition with one another anymore. The Mercedes C300 is fantastically expensive in this particular segment, but it has the nicest interior by far. The Lexus, on the other hand, has their core traditional values of high reliability, low maintenance costs, and high resale value. The maintenance costs expected on the IS are decently lower than some of the competition. Although the Cadillac ATS is a little on the small side, it is probably the best performance all-around option in this particular segment, especially the ATS 2.0T. Now the ATS 2.0T is actually faster than the IS 200T 0 to 60. It's actually a little bit faster even than the BMW 328i because it has a quite powerful 2-liter turbocharged engine under the hood, and it's relatively light, relatively compact. Now on the flip side, that compact dimension means that we have a lot less room in the back seat than we find in the Lexus. Volvo's S60 is one of the better priced options in this particular segment, but it is getting a little bit old. Now this year sees a new long wheelbase Volvo introduced to the US market that brings it to about the same kind of rear seat room that we find in this IS. The Volvo S60 is also the most fuel-efficient entry in this segment that's not a hybrid. Now, unfortunately, Lexus is keeping their hybrid model of the IS out of the United States at this time. But if you get the S60, you can expect about 30 miles per gallon average in their low-end model, and even about 27 miles per gallon average in their 300 horsepower turbocharged and supercharged engine. Of course, those will still be front-wheel drive, and the front-wheel drive driving dynamics are not going to be as good as this IS. It is very good for a front-wheel drive car, it's just not this good. Because of some of the conservative design choices that Lexus made in this particular segment, I would actually put the IS a little bit below the ATS 2.0T unless you needed the rear seat legroom. But I would put the Infiniti Q50 in most trims, still tops in this segment just above the Lexus IS. The Infiniti is an incredible value in this segment because you do get that 3.7-liter V6 standard in that model. It doesn't start out with a 2-liter turbo like we see over here or in most of the competition. Now, we do expect that to change at some point with the Infiniti Q50, but we don't know whether they're going to lower the price on the Q50 and insert that smaller engine underneath it, or whether they're going to keep that approximate price and just put the smaller engine in the base model. Either way you look at it, the Infiniti Q50 is quite simply the best value in this particular segment at the moment. We get an enormous back seat in the rear, much larger than we find in the IS or basically every other entry in this segment. The handling is absolutely excellent. The interior is also one of the best at the moment as well. That means that for me, the IS 200T ends up sort of in the middle of the pack. It really depends on how much you value the very well-deserved reliability and low ownership cost reputation that Lexus has built for themselves. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, check out the full review on the Lexus IS on my channel as well. Also check out those related videos down there at the bottom of your screen, and I'll see you next week.